She's a professional curator. Anna was a James Renwick Research Fellow with the Smithsonian's Archive of American Art, where she began her work on the craft revival. She traveled to Central America as a senior Fulbright Fellow and later served as museology specialist for the U.S. Fulbright Commission. She has been honored with several awards, including a Guardians of Culture Award from the Association of Tribal Archives and Museums, and a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Southern Highland Craft Guild. Sorry. Fariello has been an associate professor at 3 state universities, where she has taught courses in museum studies and curated traditional and digital collections, including the Craft Revival Collection for Western Carolina University. Author of 8 books, numerous book chapters and articles, she's curated over 30 exhibitions, presented over 150 conference papers, and invited lectures, and directed over 30 federal, state, and private programs. 2 of her books chronicle the history of the region's cultural organizations, Craft and Community, John C. Campbell Folk School, published in 2018, and Craft and Culture, Koala Arts and Crafts, which was published in 2021. So without further ado, I'll turn the microphone over to Anna. Here's your slide. Oh, sorry.
Woo. Thank you, and thank you, Janet. That was a wonderful talk, and to Mike and for putting this together, and also for putting our talks together. So I am going to be talking this morning about Alan Eaton, and I actually am going to be reading my paper, which I never prefer, but I have a lot of factual information that I just want to squeeze in there. So I hope you bear with me. And I also brought a lot of Alan Eaton's books and some other historical books with me this afternoon, and I'm hoping that I can set them up during lunch at a table in case anyone has questions and wants to see them. So anyway, let me see if I can get this to work. Okay, I know you said push this button. Do I aim it someplace else?
So that's your forward, that's backwards. If you hold the center, that's a portrait.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. It's kind of ironic that I'm doing this talk because I am a very strong fan of women and women's rights, but Alan Eaton is an overlooked co-founder of the Guild, and a lot of his ideas are still present in the Guild today. So I do want to bring his work to the fore. In his book, Handicrafts of the Southern Highland, author Alan Eaton chronicled the craft in the Southern Appalachians, and today, 85 years after its initial publication, it still remains useful to contemporary scholars. Maybe I'm aiming it in the wrong place. Do I aim it someplace else?
Try it. We're pointing at the computer itself.
Point it at the projector.
Projector right here.
On the table.
Can I give it to you and just say next? Okay, let me do that. Okay, next.
Welcome to conferences.
Yes. Okay.
You just tell me.
I'm just going to give you a signal, so I don't even have to say it. Thank you. Early in the 20th century, Eaton did as much to explain and promote the handcraft movement as anyone in the region. He was an author, speaker, and curator, as well as a champion, partner, and connector. He was a pivot point for discussions and activities that took place in Western North Carolina and in other Appalachian states. Next. Raised in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Oregon, in 1902, Eaton began producing exhibits, maybe why he's close to my heart. In 1915, he joined the University of Oregon faculty and was elected as the youngest member of the Oregon State Legislature. Eaton's path became fixed when he was presented with an opportunity to curate an exhibition for the 1915 International Panama Pacific Exhibition in San Francisco. In the exhibit catalog, Eaton expressed his philosophy, quote, No sharp line of definition can be drawn between the finer and the minor arts, he wrote. Quote, both are equally important. His monumental exhibition included over 600 works of art on view. And I want to make a point about this minor art. So throughout my undergraduate and graduate careers, I always worked in the slide library. And of course, that was with catalog drawers at the time and real slides. And they still, up through the mid-1980s, they still had craft in a drawer that was labeled minor arts. Okay. Yes, that one. With patriotism running high as the U.S. entered the Great War, Easton's attendance at a peace rally became hometown news. Following a front-page editorial, the case came close to causing riots in Eugene. When he returned home, he faced dismissal from the university. In 1918, after 3 years on the faculty and 13 years in the legislature, Easton was dismissed and lost the primary election. He left Oregon the next day. I can actually do it if I just... Okay.
Just the arrows.
It's just that thing worked. With family and $20 in his pocket, Easton went to New York City to begin anew. Within a few years, he landed a position with the American Federation of Arts, where he organized another exhibition called Arts and Crafts of the Homelands, an exhibition that brought him acclaim. In 1919, when the Homelands exhibition opened at the Albright Knox Gallery in Buffalo, New York, almost 50,000 people came to see it. Pretty astonishing. Easton placed value on creativity and beauty in the home by placing objects in a domestic environment. He would later use this technique in exhibitions for the Guild. Another of Easton's exhibition was Prints in Color and Photographs for American Homes, a collection of 128 reproductions of famous paintings that pictured country life and rural scenes. Like John Ruskin and William Morris before him, Easton's interest in art and making was aimed at a public audience and was decidedly democratic. I'm going to just flip through these really fast because Easton was a prolific curator and writer of many exhibitions and publications. America's Making exhibition in New York City at the Armory in 1921. Immigrant Gifts to American Life, where he used handwork as material evidence to demonstrate the value of diversity. He was very well ahead of the times in some of the issues that he brought up. The Rural Arts Exhibition in 1937 that was created in connection with the 75th anniversary of the Department of Agriculture, and then it had a catalog or a companion publication that came out in 1946. Handicrafts of New England in 1949. Another controversial work, which was also an exhibition, Beauty Behind Barbed Wire, The Arts of the Japanese in Our War Relocation Camps, written in 1952, for which former First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt wrote the introduction. And this one I haven't read, and I'm fascinated just by the idea. Beauty for the Sighted and Blind, which was an exhibition and a companion book in 1959 with a foreword by Helen Keller. I mean, that's an amazing record. I have to talk quickly, so now I'm quickly going to talk about how Alan Easton connection to the Guild. In 1920, Easton accepted a position with the Russell Sage Foundation that would place him on a path intersecting with folk school founder Olive Dame Campbell. Of course, as Janet mentioned, Campbell's husband John had been the Southern Field Secretary for Russell Sage for almost 20 years. After his death in 1919, so he died in 1919, Eaton came in 1920, so they didn't actually cross paths. But Olive, she continued to organize the Conference of Southern Mountain Workers, which we'll see played an extremely important part in the formation of the Guild. It was an annual networking forum. It was actually twice a year. Eaton recorded his meeting with Olive Campbell in the magazine Mountain Life and Work. Quote, "One afternoon last winter, as I stepped from my office, I met Mrs. Campbell, who was hurrying to catch her train for Washington on her way home to the mountains. A conversation between the two caused Campbell to miss her train, but the time was well spent. Their chance meeting sparked a relationship that lasted the rest of their lives. Mainly through her effort, Western Carolina became Eaton's home away from home. Throughout his life, he returned frequently. At a 1940 conference, Eaton said, quote, I believe there is no state in the country that is more sympathetic with the handicraft program than North Carolina, unquote. I try to use a lot of quotes so you hear the voice of these people, and I do use that period language, which at the time was handicraft. At Campbell's invitation, Eaton spoke at the 1926 meeting of the Southern Mountain Workers, choosing his topic, quote, and this also makes me laugh, Eaton had the longest titles for everything. Mountain Handicrafts, what they mean to our home life and to the life of our country. He quoted William Morris, quote, art is the expression of man's joy in work. He provided an inclusive definition of art that appealed to mountain workers. Quote, this concept breaks away from the idea of art still held by many people, which would confine it to painting, sculpture, and classic architecture. It holds that the principles of art may be applied to all man-made things. Art is above all else the most appropriate, most fitting way of doing. Art is not so much the thing that is done as the manner of doing it. I don't know if any of you are familiar with author Ellen DeSaniak, who wrote a book in the 1990s called Homo Aestheticus, in which she really defines art as a special way of making. Again, Eaton was well ahead of his time. At the spring 1930 conference of the Southern Mountain Workers, Eaton gave an expanded version of his talk printed in the July 1930 issue of Mountain Life and Work. And this was very common for the conference to be held, and then the magazine would come out and it would include not only details of what happened at the conference, but often an essay that was, sort of word for word of one of the talks at the conference. There and in Handicrafts of the Southern Highlands, Eaton described the meetings that led to the formation of the Guild, and Eaton was present at every single one of the gatherings. And this is Eaton's description, quote, 2 days after Christmas in December 1928, a small group of people came together in the weaver's cabin at Penland to talk over the handicraft situation in the mountains, unquote. Eaton poetically recalled the memory, the snowflakes falling outside and the log fire blazing within. There were 8 handicraft centers represented at the meeting. And remember, this is an extremely rural and inaccessible area where they came together without a benefit of cell phones and emails in December of all times. They informally proposed the name Southern Mountain Handicraft Guild and planned to meet again in the spring. In April 1929, the Conference of Southern Mountain Workers, at the Conference of Southern Mountain Workers, the group discussed the possibility of forming an organization. And this Helen Dingman of Kentucky was elected to take the necessary steps. At the time, Dingman was editor of Mountain Life and Work, among other things. The third meeting was held again on December 28th, 1929, at the original spinning wheel, which was at Beaver Lake. The core group of, and that was before, so her spinning wheel was at Beaver Lake, and then it moved to Hendersonville Road. A core group of craft enthusiasts participated, sitting in a circle, keeping warm around a wood stove. And that was Olive Campbell of the Folk School, Dr. Mary Sloop, who Janet talked about at the Crossnor School, which housed the Crossnor Weavers, Lucy Morgan of Penland Weavers and Potters. So this predates the Penland School. This was actually her organization. Frances Goodrich of Allenstan Cottage Industries, Wilmer Stone, who had the weave shop in Saluda, Evelyn Bishop, representing Pi Beta Phi Settlement School at Aramont, Helen Dingman in Berea, Clementine Douglas, who was, of course, the hostess, and Alan Eaton, representing the Russell Sage Foundation. And the group identified 22 producing centers to be eligible for membership. So they were really well on their way to conceiving of the Guild. Now, they use this word, producing centers, throughout their discussions of membership. And of course, in the very beginning of the Guild, the membership was mostly organizational members, not individual members. The Conference of Southern Mountain Workers met again in April 1930 with a request to view work by mountain craft centers. Eaton sent invitations to 24 centers, but when they came in, 32 different producing centers responded. So this is, I love these two photographs. This is a photograph of the exhibition after Alan Eaton took in all of this work. And again, it is a huge exhibition. It was held in a semicircular room in the First Presbyterian Church in Knoxville. And at this meeting, the group adopted its constitution and bylaws. So they're well on their way. So you can see, I'm going to talk a little bit next about Doris Ullman. Doris Ullman's photographs were on view. You can see them there, and you can't see it in the slide, but I blew them up, and they are the same photographs that the Guild currently has in its collection. Doris Ullman was already a successful photographer when she met Alan Eaton and became involved with the craft revival. When Eaton began organizing exhibitions of mountain crafts, her photographs of craft makers at work provided context for his writing. 58 of her photographs were published posthumously in Eaton's Handicrafts of the Southern Highlands, and she gifted 50 photographs to the new Guild. In the 1930s, the Guild began hosting twice annual meetings. See, a lot of this really harks back to those very first days, because this annual meetings that we have today. In March 1931, at their meeting in Gatlinburg, quote, Mr. Eaton then reported the most generous offer of Miss Frances Goodrich to present the Allenstan Cottage Industries to the Southern Highland Handicraft Guild, Southern Mountain Handicraft Guild. Eaton continued to influence the Guild's direction. Quote, when the question of making smaller and less expensive articles was discussed, Mr. Eaton said that indulgence in cheap articles would ruin the Guild, unquote. In October 1931, the Guild met at the Folk School. Eaton proposed approaching the American Federation of Arts to circulate an exhibition. And you see these meetings, there's one every October and then again in April. So they gain a lot of traction through this constant interaction and networking. Not email, personal face-to-face connection. In April 1932, the annual meeting was again held in Gatlinburg. This meeting, the Guild established its library and accepted the Cherokee into the Guild. And again, at this point, most members were centers rather than individuals. And this photo is not in Gatlinburg, but It is at the Cherokee Indian Fair in 1951, and I wanted to include that because it's a pretty rare photo of Alan Eaton, and Lucy George is the basket weaver next to him. Another interesting note was that the Guild at this meeting almost elected its home base to be in Virginia when it voted to purchase an old mill in Giles County where they would have headquarters and a gift shop. In October 1932, the group met at the Pine Mountain Settlement School in Kentucky. Eaton's plans for an exhibit were underway, and he stated the goal for his exhibit. And I think these were right on target. Number one, greater interest will be awakened in the mountain crafts. 2, marketing will be stimulated. And 3, new friends for the Guild will be cultivated. In April 1933, the group substituted the word Highland for mountain, creating the name the Southern Highland Handicraft Guild, which of course was the same name it kept for several decades. The formal name change came just in time for the first Guild exhibition and printed catalog. And now I'm going to specifically talk about this exhibition called Mountain Handicrafts, which was created in 1933. The Mountain Handicrafts exhibition opened in Blacksburg, Virginia, in conjunction with the annual conference of the American Country Life Association in August. And this Country Life Association, I mean, it's a fascinating intersection because with all that was going on in terms of the craft movement, it was a national organization that was formed, I believe, in 1908 after Theodore Roosevelt hosted a conference because they considered the loss of country life to be a problem for the U.S. because we were in this great transition from moving to industrialization. So it was a national movement where the craft revival sort of fit into it as a regional movement. Eaton spoke at the conference, and his title was Wood Piles and Haystacks, a talk on art in rural life. And again, it was reprinted in Mountain Life and Work, and it was broadcast on a Washington, D.C. radio station. Perhaps more than anyone else, Alan Eaton took responsibility for spreading the word about craft. After its premiere, the Mountain Handicrafts exhibition was circulated by the American Federation of Arts to several sites, including the Corcoran Gallery in Washington, D.C., the Brooklyn Institute of Arts, Decatur Art Museum in Illinois, Joslin Memorial Building in Nebraska, and the National Folk Festival in St. Louis. When the exhibition opened in Washington, D.C., President and First Lady Roosevelt visited and purchased several items from the exhibit. Eaton conducted an extensive survey of the region's craft and published his study in 1937, and this is the text, Handicrafts of the Southern Highlands. Eaton defined the parameters of the craft revival and marked its beginnings. Revival was not a, quote, sudden turning of large numbers of workers to handwork, he explained, but rather a gradual renewing of interest and activity in the old-time arts. Eaton outlined the multi-dimensional nature of handicraft. And I've used a lot of this framework in my own writing. He enumerated craft's characteristics: technical, tactile, visual, economic, social, spiritual, and therapeutic. Inadvertently, part of Eaton's philosophy had a damaging effect on craft in the 20th century. Throughout his writing, Eaton included, quote, the healing or therapeutic power of art and art making. And this was a contribution that was very positive to the development of such fields as occupational therapy. but detrimental to the development of American studio craft, well, at least the perception of American studio craft. Because so he had a discussion in one of his talks, he bragged on work produced, quote, at a well-known hospital for the insane. And of course that played well at the conference to the Southern Mountain Workers, but in the long run, the repercussions of this approach were devastating to the professional craftsmen. The typical kind of arts and crafts kind of object, where the word handicraft came to be associated with institutionalized teaching and amateurism. And you grew up with those jokes about going to college to take, underwater basket weaving, So, it was a double-edged sword, the fact that he was so able to promote and to spread this idea of craft well outside of the region, and at the same time, it had this negativity. When Alan Eaton died in 1962, Eileen Osborne Webb, founder of the American Craft Council, dubbed him the Dean of American Craft. And I always like to use, for those of you who saw the Craft Revival project that we did at Western Carolina University, I always define the Craft Revival as ending in, I define it as starting in 1896, because that was when Berea College held its first homespun fair. And that was a real recognition of the arts that were being made in the region by local people. And I always like to use the end. Scholarship, you always have to have this beginning and the ending. And the end of 1945, because the regional movement, of course the regional movement continued, but in 1945, with the founding of the American Craft Council, that became where it fit into a national movement. So he was called the Dean of American Crafts. Eaton subscribed to an intangible benefit of craft work, quote, what he always called the effect of the work on the producer, as he put it. The meditative quality of craft process and the personal perseverance it takes to pursue a daily practice of making was thought to be good for one's character. Both Ruskin and Eaton believed that bringing pleasure back to work would inspire the worker to become self-directed, self-disciplined, and free to pursue a path of self-discovery. And I'll close with my favorite Eaton quote, "The time will come when every kind of work will be judged by two measurements, one by the product itself, and the other by the effect of the work on the producer." Thank you.